Today's daf is Daf Yud Aleph in Avodah Zaras. We learn Fachen Kol Beis Yisrael and soon about Sarva Shivya. We said we'll start from about 5 lines above the wide lines, but you know what? The story is about Onkelos, a famous story. Everybody knows the story. We'll take it from the top of the page. Onkelos Bar Clonimus. Onkelos, we know the famous Onkelos, who was before Rashi's time. He was much earlier. He was the time really of the Tanam. He was a nephew of the emperor, Roman emperor. Egayer, he became a convert after he saw the Jewish customs, etc., and the rules, and he came to recognize Rabbanu Shalom, and he was a convert. The Shadar Kaiser, the Caesar, the emperor, sent a contingent. It was his nephew, and if the punishment for becoming a Jew could be death, so he tried to bring him back to Rome. Shadar Kaiser Gunda Drama, he sent a band, a contingent of Romans, Abasrei, after him to Eretz Yisrael to try to bring him back to Rome. Meshchina B'Kroi, but he drove them in with quoting Psukim, and he convinced them to Megayer. They also were Megayer. They sent another group of Romans to try to bring them back, presumably not just Uncles, maybe the other ones who had converted to Abasrei. Amalahu. And the emperor told them, listen, don't talk to this guy, Uncles, just bring him back. If you talk to him, he's going to try to convince you and you become a Jew also. Don't talk to him. When they were bringing him back, I'm just going to tell you a little story. Nefruta kame nura be'alma. Nefura nakat nura kame pefura. The lower level guards or soldiers, whatever, they carry a torch in front of the pifior. That's the word we use now, and a pifior for the modern word for the Pope, right? It means a Roman dignitary, an officer. So he carries the torch before the pifior. Pifior leduchsa. These are higher levels. You go from the soldier to the to whatever, to the lieutenant, to the captain, to the major, whatever. You go up. Like Kuma is like the king. Does the king carry a torch in front of anybody else? Or really low. The king is the top level. They carry the thing from him. He doesn't do it for anybody else. Hakadosh Baruch Hu Nura Kami Yisrael. Hakadosh Baruch Hu, who is the king of the Jews, so to speak, he carries the torch before the Jewish people, for his people. Hashem carries the torch for them. So all the second contingent also converted and became Jews after Uncles and after the first contingent. The Caesar sent, the emperor sent another, he had a third contingent of us. Don't talk to him at all. Don't listen to any stories. Don't talk to him at all. When they grabbed them and they took him, he saw the mezuzah hanging on the doorpost. He put his hand on the mezuzah like we do. We put your hand on it to kiss it. Maya, he said, what is this thing? What's this thing that the Jews have on the doorpost? Amalei, you tell us. Amalahu, he told him, the minig of the word customer the king sits inside, and his guards and his servants guard him on the outside. Ve'ilu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when it comes to the Bar Shalom, avodav b'bifnim, the servants, the Jewish people are inside. He guards them on the outside. Hashem guards your goings and comings from now till forever. So they also, the third contingent, also converted when they heard this. Sulo Shadar Basrei. Then the emperor gave up and he didn't send anybody after them at all. And he lost not only Unkelos, his nephew, but also he lost the 3 contingents. Pasuk goes on, Vayomer Hashem Lo. Hashem told, this was Rivka, of course, Shnei, you have 2 nations in your belly. Even though the pasuk said we read it as goyim, 2 nations, but it's written with 2 yuds, not with a vav and a yud, but with 2 yuds, which means more like 2 leaders, right? 2 important people, dignitaries. Zan Tuninis Rebbe, famous story on Tuninis, the Roman emperor, or whatever his title was. He was the leader and Rebbe, and he was very close. As we'll see, they were very secret friends. Tanis was afraid that all the Romans would find out about it, and then they would put him away. But he remained very friendly with Rebbe. Rebbe gave him good advice. Tanis Rebbe that they lived very nicely. That on their table there was always there was never any loss of nothing was missing. Meaning lo chazeres, no lettuce, well kishas, not cucumbers, lo sanom. They had all these healthy things on their table always. Whether it was in the summer and the winter, they never missed those things. Why? Because they're healthy. That radishes are good to dissolve the food in your stomach. Chazeres mahapach machol, and the lettuce digests it, helps it to digest. It gives you fiber. Kishas marcha b'mayim, and cucumbers expand the intestines. It's good for digestion. Why are they called kishuin? They should caution the gufashlam. They're called kishun because they're difficult, they're bad, they're hard on the body. They're difficult for the body. Kacharovas like swords. They're as dangerous to the stomach as swords. As lokasha habaravi by big ones. Small ones are healthy. Yomi says, so back in the mission Daf Ches, we said that those days, the day of the king's birth and his death, at least for his sons will keep his yahrzeit. Those are days of holidays that the holidays in which not only can you not do business with the goyim, but even with 3 days before you can't do business with them either. So Rav Meir said the day of the birth and the day of the death. The Chacham said no. The only kind of death, the only type of yahrzeit that you have to be careful of and not do business with them is only if they burn the king's belongings in those days. They burn the king's belongings, then it's a sign of avodah zarah. If they don't burn his belongings, then there's no avodah zarah there, and you could do business with them even on the yard side. But Rav Meir doesn't make any difference. Says Gemara Machlal on the fourth of the wide lines on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Whether it's a yard side in which they burn the clothes or the belongings of the king, or where they don't, they still worship the avodah zarah. In other words, any yard side of the king, they worship their avodah zarah and don't do business with them, not only that day, but days before also. Alma. So what do you see? According to Rav Meir, the burning is not part of the idol worship, because it doesn't make any difference. The idol worship is because of the yard side. They worship their idols on the yard side, whether they burn the clothes or don't go. So you see that the burning the clothes is not part of their custom, part of their cult, part of the avodah zarah worship itself. Right? It's mashma that according to Rabbanan we say no, only a yard site in which they're burning the clothes, because burning the clothes is a symbol of a sign of the avodah zarah that they do. If that's the case, you burn the clothes even for Jewish kings who died. How can you say it's a avodah zarah if burning the clothes is a kind of worship that the Goyim do? How could we do it for Jewish kings? And the Gemara says, "Sarfin ala malachim." You burn the belongings of the Jewish kings. It's not considered chukas hagoyim. The chuki, if according to Rabbanan, that it's only usher if they burn the clothes. It's not the arts. Only usher to do business with them. Only if they burn the clothes. It's mashma that it's part of their religion. It's part of their religious practice. The chuki anan. How can we burn the clothes? You're not allowed to do what they do. Rashi brings out another place, right? Says another place, don't do like they do. Don't follow their statutes. So how could that be? If it, according to Rabbanan, that it's mashma that the shreifa is part of their worship, part of their idol worship, then how do we do that for Jewish kings? They have to say, everybody, even the Rabbanan say that burning the clothes is not part of their religious practice. It's a sign of the importance of the esteem that they held for the king, that they don't want anybody else to have enough from those belongings, so they burn them. Whether it's a yard side we have shreifa or not, they worship their avodah zarah on the yard side, period. If it's a yard site that the goyim keep, in which they burn the clothes, that shows that it's important. And therefore they worship their avodah zarah on that day. But if they don't burn the clothes, lo chashiva, therefore it's not, the yard site's not as important, or they don't hold that king in such high esteem, and they don't worship their avodah zarah. Gufa. We say we burn the belongings of a Jewish king, and there's not considered chukas hagoyim, not what they call darchei ha'amori. Amori is a word for goyim. It says b'shalom tamus. Yirmiyahu said to Tzidkiyahu, our king, b'shalom, you're going to die peacefully. That in the way that your ancestors, they burnt their belongings, they'll burn yours too. Just like they burn for Jewish kings, even for princes, even if they're not kings, burn their belongings too. Mine, so from what do they bring on malachim? Mitos on their bed, place tashmishan, the things that they used, all their implements, all their different abizarim that they used, all their appliances, they burned all that stuff. There was a story where Gamliel Zokain died. The sorrowful of Unclus Sager, we just told the story about Unclus. They burned him Shiva Mona Tsuri, burnt like $7,000. We'll call that. The Mona Tsuri is like 100 Syrian darker. So Shiva 70 times 100, 7,000 they burnt. So first of all, you understand that the chronology doesn't make that much sense here. The Mefarshim say that it's not Gamliel Zokain, it's probably Gamliel of Yavna, who was his grandson, because Gamliel Zokain was before. In other words, Unclus was a Talmud of his Talmidim, so it makes more sense. It's probably a mismatch, it's probably a different Rabbi Gamliel. But in any case, Unclus burned, apparently it's $7,000. I've heard mine said, what do you mean, how could they burn money, mine from their bed, klei tashmishan, their appliances, things of that sort, not money. It says, it means they burnt his appliances or his implements, all his belongings, worth $7,000. But they didn't burn anything else. They didn't destroy anything else. By the time we learn, okrin ala malachim, they even mutilate animals as part of the Jewish one, the Jewish people. They mutilate animals as a sign of respect for the king. In other words, like the king's animals. So how can you say it's only their implements, their appliances? They even mutilate animals. We'll see what kind of mutilation we're talking about. Not necessarily tsar balachan. Oh, that's different. His horse, the royal horse. The kings get the horses dress up in all those clothes. They have them all dressed up. The king's horse, that's what you mutilate. Says not other animals, not just kosher animals. If you're mutilating the animal in such a way that it's going to be a treifa, basically you're killing it, slow death. That's also, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to make an animal treifa. Stam shemba treifa. If you're just mutilating it to show you're like ripping off some skin just to show respect for the king, then it's mutter. Bezu iker shemba treifa. What is an example of mutilation that doesn't involve treifa? Hamanasha prasaseh min arkubalamata. If you trim the tendons of the hoofs from below the ankle. So that's just a way of, people did that. Some people did that in order to be able to run faster, that they wouldn't feel the rocks, etc. But this is something that they do for animals. What does it have to do? What is an animal like that? If you trim his tendons below the hoofs, what does that have to do with the king's appliances, the king's, nechasim, his personal effects? Talking about Papa be'egla hamoshechas b'karim. We're talking about a calf that pulls the royal carriage. So again, it's part of his ensemble. It's part of his items. Those things are all done. Either it's burning his bed or slightly mutilating his horse or his calf that pulls his wagon. That's all part of the respect that they had for the king. Yom Tikla Chazikna. Then we said that another day, the days that we mentioned before are days in which those are real avodah zarah days. You can't do business with them that day and the day before, and 3 days before, or one day before, according to one shita. But let's say the day that he takes a haircut, that any goy avodah zarah takes a haircut, trims his beard and his blurius. That means his chup or his whatever his on his hair, whatever his locks, and there's no or the day that he got out of came home from an ocean going voyage, whatever he went on the ocean, came back safely. Those days, only that person in that day are usher, but not all of the avodah zarah. Only you can't do business with that person. So it said Yom Tikla Chazikna, the day that he shaves his beard and his locks on his hair. How do you read this? Yom Tikla Chazikna v'anochas b'leir says the day that he shaves his beard and leaves the locks on his hair. It's like a ponytail. Or is it once a year where he actually shaves off the ponytail as well, the blurius? So is it the day and he shaves, and then when he shaves and he takes a haircut and he leaves the chup there, the locks, or is it the day that he shaves it off, which is more like once a year? Tashman Tarfaya, both of them. So the day that he shaves and he leaves his blurs. That's a sign of a Vodazara. And Yom Tikal Zikna, it's also the day, like once a year, when he shaves off the blurs as well. So all those days are also do business with that person and only that day. There's another Roman custom that they had. There was another Roman custom that you can't do business with them on that day. What was that? Baromi. Now the Romans, as we mentioned before, or Edom, come from Esav. The Jews, of course, come from Yaakov. Yaakov and Esav were twins, and of course they fought. And Yaakov took away the Bechorah from Esav with his mother's plan, etc. But the Romans and the descendants of both parties, the Jews and the Edomites or the Esav heirs, they all knew the story. They all knew the story, and they were resentful. The Goyim were always resentful how Yaakov, so to speak, took away the Bechorah from Esav, their ancestor. So what would happen was that there was a holiday, Baromi in Rome, once every 70 years. Leviim Adam Shalom, they would bring a person who was healthy, symbolizing Esav, and they would make him ride on the back of a person who was lame, indicating Yaakov, who was hurt by the Malach, right? So the lame person symbolized the Jews, and the healthy person symbolized Esav. Well, Abishon also big day Adam Rishon, they dressed him in skins and hide of Adam Rishon, like of yesteryear. Manichla Barosho Kakiflo, so Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel was one of the Asura Regei Malchus, one of the people who were killed by the Romans, but they skinned his face off before he was killed because he was so beautiful, and they stored his face. In other words, they preserved his face, his skull and his face, and they dressed apparently they dressed the lame person with the face of Rabbi Shmuel, make him look like the Jew, and they hung on his neck, Misko. We have a Reish Zuzah de Pisa. It's either 200 or it could be $2 Zuzim of Pisa. Tosa says, how could there be so much gold? But whatever. They hung some money, let's say, around him. And that day, they adorned the markets in Rome with onyx stones. And they would call out in front of him, again, trying to make fun of the Jew, because the Esav now was powerful and the Jews were not. The Romans ruled over the Jews. So they made fun of him. Fun of Sach Kire Plaster. Sach means he calculated. Kire means of the dignitary, the king or whatever. Plaster is a fake, meaning the reckoning, the cheshbon, the calculation of the great man Yaakov. They're referring to Yaakov, their great uncle. This Plaster is wrong. It's a mistake. They made a mistake. Why? Because they said that Rav Yavod Sa'ir, right? That the Esav will worship Sa'ir Yaakov. Just the opposite. We see now that Romans are ruling over the Jews. Achvadamarna Zaifna, the brother of our leader, our master, is a forgery, right? He's a forgery. Achvadamarna Zaifa is a forgery, meaning Yaakov fooled that he was fake. He wasn't really the Bechor. And he got this bracha and he thinks he's going to be in charge. You see that the Romans are in charge. The chami, whoever sees it, sees it. The lo chami, if you don't see it, you'll never see it. You know why? Because it's only once in 70 years. People didn't live that long anymore, right? We're past the time of the early stages of Adam Rishon and Avram and things like that when they lived for hundreds of years, right? If you didn't see it, you're not going to be around the next time 70 years. Something happens once in 70 years, you probably won't be around to see it next time. Maya Hani Ramal, what did it help this cheater, Baramuse? The cheater didn't help. He cheated to try to get the Bechorah. It didn't help him. Well, Zayaf say with his forgery, and as he forged to get the Bechorah. Simon Bay, and they finish off the procession. Hachi Vailadain Kad Yakum Dain. Woe to this one if this one ever gets up. Rashi says this is merely from woe unto Esav, meaning us, if Yaakov ever rises up and becomes in charge. Woe unto us, because we won't be in such good shape then. Interesting that they end off that way. Their own mouths, they said it wrong. Their own mouths said it wrong. Why? If they would have said that a forger, meaning a cheater, the brother of our master Esav, is a forger, then they would have said it right. Hash de Amri Demarna Zaifna. The way they said it is that Achva Demarna, the brother of our master, forgery. But you could put the word Zaifna going on their master, because you could say Achva, the brother of our master, the forger. You could say it on Esav. Marna Gufe Zaifna. Marna stuff, you could say that the word goes. They put the word Zaif next to the master. They didn't say it right. They weren't too careful. All right. So number one, the first will say, why is it once in 70 years? Because they knew that the Jews are redeemed every once in 70 years, like Golos Bavel. They were redeemed then. So if it's now 70 years have passed and they haven't been redeemed, we're going to have a party, right? Just like Achashverosh's party, right? They're going to be, Achashverosh held a party because he felt that the 70 years was up and he miscalculated. It was only 68 or 69 years, the story of Purim. So here too, they felt that once in 70 years. So if this is the great party that they had, and they worshipped the Avodah Zarah with this whole procession, why wasn't it included? We listed all the holidays that the Goyim have, whatever, before the winter solstice and after the winter solstice, and the king's yard site and his birthday, etc. Why not mention this one too? My time lahai says the Isa something that they have every year, an annual holiday kachashiv. Those are listed. The lesson kachashiv. He didn't mention that one, even though apparently it would have the same effect. That if you were happen to be around that holiday that they kept when they made fun of Yaakov with this procession, you shouldn't do business with them that day and 3 days before that too. So the Gemara says, Hani Ramon. Okay, so now you've listed the Mishnah all the Roman holidays. The Parsoi Mai. What about the Persians? They were also of the Avodah Zarah. My Mutardi V'Turiski Muharniki Umaharan. Those four holidays that the Persians had. Hani the Parsoi the Roman. Those are the ones of the Persians or the Romans. The Bavloi Mai. What about the ones of the Babylonians? My Muharniki Vaknise Bachnuni V'Eser B'Adar. Oh, Eser B'Adar sounds good. The 10th of Adar, right? Asara B'Adar. They had that one too. I don't know what the meaning of it was, but those are the holidays that they had. Amrav Chanan Barav Chista Amrav Amilo Amrav Chanan Barava Amrav Chamisha Bat. We've been talking about holidays that they kept when you shouldn't do business with them because they'll go and thank their idols, and the days before that too, because if you do business with them before, they'll come to thank their idols on the holiday. But there are also temples that they had. There are 5 famous temples that they have, where they practice Avodah Zarah there all the time. Not that everybody keeps it. In the holidays, they all keep it, like the Havdalah Christmas. Everybody keeps Christmas, so you know when Christmas is, right? But there are temples that they have where people worship there all the time. Not necessarily everybody worships all the time, but they worship all the time. There are 5 temples, but they have Kavuin, that are fixed, that people go there, they're always open for business. Alien, what are they? Bet Baal B'Bavel. In Bavel, there's this thing called Bet Baal. Bet Nevo Bakursi is called Bet Nevo there. Tarasa Sheb these places, those are the names of the temples and the place that they're located. Tarasa, which is in Mapag. Srif of Sheba Ashkelon, that we know. Ashkelon, we know, was a place of idols. They still have a lot of idols there, right? And you find them in the parks there, right? Neshra Barvaya and Nashra in Arabia. So these 5 temples, you shouldn't go there at all. Guess Rav Dimi came from Sifal, and he added on Yerid Sheba Ein Bechi, another one called Yerid, usually means the market, in Ein Bechi, and Nidbacha, right, which is Sheba Akko. So all these cities, mostly Jewish cities, like in Eretz Yisrael, they had these Avodah Zarah too. He has on 2 more for a soul 7. Economics, some say that it wasn't Nidbacha but Nizbaro Sheba Akko, and Akko was called not Nidbacha but Nizbaro. Rav Dimi min Arda, he learned that the last 2 were the other way around. Yerid was not in Ein Bechi, but Yerid was in Akko, and Nidbacho it was in Ein Bechi. Amalei Rav Chanan bar Rav Chisda l'Rav Chisda. He said, "My kavur." And what do you mean by that? They are kavur. They're all the time there. It can't mean that everybody keeps this holiday. If everybody kept the holiday every day, all the time, then and they all worshipped every day. If like it was Christmas every day, when would anybody do business, right? Wouldn't be a big deal. You wouldn't even get Christmas gifts because they have it every day, so it wouldn't be a special day. We're at the first of the white lines. This is what your maternal grandfather said. Tadira kulashas. What does it mean that they're always there? Tadira kulashas. They're all around. Kulashas all year round. They're always there. Kulashas there all year round. People worship there, but it doesn't mean that everybody worships. It just means you should stay away from there. How much more? Pardon?
Like a shrine.
Yeah, like a shrine. Yeah, temples. Yeah. I told you that in the East, you still find these things. Years ago, we were traveling and we were in a place called Macau off of Hong Kong, and there's a lot of sights to see there. But they have literally avodah zarah places where there's like a building, like a little, not a very big building, like a small, like a shtibel, and out of the roof are trees growing. The trees grow inside and they go right out of the roof and they worship the trees. That's what we call Atzei Asherah. You have to destroy that. You can't go in. You can't even go in for a peek. Amar Shmuel. Oh, so this is something that we mentioned before in Daf Zion. Shmuel said that these rules about keeping the day before is only in Eretz Yisrael, that you got to keep the day before or 3 days before. But in the Golus, only that day, they're not so religious over there, and only the day of the holiday himself is an usher. V'yo made him nami miyasa, but easy is the day even of the holiday in Chutz La'aretz is a really usher to do business with them. But Rav Yehuda Sharle Rav Bruna or Rav Nachman, Rav Yehuda was mater allowed Rav Bruna the zvune chamra to buy or sell a donkey. Rav Gidel the zvune chitin to buy a wheat from them. On the day of the Arabs, what they had that Arabs who were traveling merchants, they allowed them to do business with them, buying from them donkeys and wheat and things like that. It's a shining chai to the title. It's not a fixed holiday. They don't have it every year, Rashi says. They don't have it every year, and because of that, it's not considered a real holiday in which they worship their idols. Says the Mishnah, a city, we've talked about when you have this avodah zarah, these holidays, only a city that has this particular idol worship, only in the city is it also to do business with them because that city worships avodah zarah. But chutz l'mutar, let's say there's areas, suburbs around the city, they don't necessarily worship that avodah zarah. Every city had its own avodah zarah. Like everyone had their own world champion, every city had their own world champion. They had their own idols, right? Let's say outside the city they had a certain kind of avodah zarah, then tocha l'mutar, inside the city is okay because they don't worship the same idols. Can you travel to that city on a day where they do avodah zarah in that particular city? If that road that you're taking only goes into that city and doesn't go any further, don't take it. You're on Highway 40 only goes to that particular city, and that city's doing avodah zarah. Don't go to that city today. You know why? Because it's a shot. People will think that you're going to worship the avodah zarah. So don't take the city. If the road though continued on to another place, you were going on a long trip, but it happened to pass through, I don't know, Indianapolis or some other place, that the road went through Indianapolis, but you can continue on with Highway 40 in the old days. From St. Louis all the way to New York, you go through Indianapolis, right? So if the road ended in Indianapolis, so don't go there, people will think you're going to do it avodah zarah. That's called chashad, that people will suspect, you'll be under suspicion. But if the road went somewhere else, people will just assume that you were taking the road and we're going to go further. What do you mean outside the city? Going Atlusa Shel Aza, that like Atlus of Aza. Aza was a city where they had avodah zarah. And Atlusa was right outside that city. So that's an example of a place that's outside the city. So in other words, if they did avodah zarah in Azah, you could still go to Atlusa. Rashi says, how far does it have to be away? Kami 3 lines from down on the page in Rashi. Kami bracha goes to shuk shechusalav in a ear. The mutalasas they can do business with them. Atlusa shuk shel behema kamo itliz. That's why it's called this. The time was a shuk. Shochem beitliz and men beitliz. Azah ir shel plishtin. Now here Rashi says it was a city of the Philistines, not the Palestinians. The Philistines. So here, even though Rashi makes it sound like it was a city of the Plishtim, but Rashi in Gemara and Shabbos says that Azah is part of Eretz Yisrael. So, the Ashkelon was a Philistine city, right? Ashkelon, full of Philistines, but it was still considered part of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so it's right near there. And that's a city that's nearby. So the Pashup shot of here is that, okay, if in the city they worship avodah zarah, chutzalaf, you want to go to the market outside there and do business with them, not a problem. Some say, back in the Gemara in the second 2 lines from the bottom page, he asked him this question, he posed a question to me, he says, Atlusa shel Azah ma'u. What about the case of Atlusa shel Azah, if that's right next to the city, what would that be okay? Rashi says Atlusa shel Azah in the last line on the daf, the smuchalir ma'od. We said a city, the Mishnah said if you have a city of Avodah Zarah, outside the city, they don't do that Avodah Zarah, so it's okay to do business with them. What happens if the market is right outside the city? That's what Rashi is asking a kasha. No. What about a case like that where it's literally right next to the city? What do you say there? Amalei, so Rav Chanina answered him, Lo alach l'tzur, have you never been to Tzur, that's the city of Tyre, places where Jews and Goyim live there. Barisi Yisrael, you ever see there, Jews and Goyim live there together. Again, Goyim here means over there Avodah Zarah. And you see Barisi Yisrael v'chavim, sheshafso shtei k'neres al gavakir, they both place, shafso means like to place your pot on the stove. Akira is a oven, they were all fired on the inside in those days, Akira, but it holds two pots. He says they had two pots on the same stove. In other words, Goyim, a Jewish person who was Shomer Torah mitzvahs, everything Haredi, but they had their stove, they shared a stove with a Avodah Zarah. They both put the pots there. And the Chum weren't worried about it. As if to say that there's no concern over here. You were asking about these people live right outside the city of the Goyim. Are you allowed to do it? So he says, have you never seen Jews and Goyim cooking on the same stove? Now, my law shulchan, what does it mean that the Chum were not concerned about it? So we have different shatim. What does that mean? What was the concern if the Goy is cooking on the same stove as the Jew? Is it an Isser D'Oraisa? What do you mean by an Isser D'Oraisa? For example, maybe the Goy will take some of his nevela, non-kosher food, and put it into the Jewish pot. Is that the concern? If a Chum weren't concerned about that, certainly they're not concerned about a case here. Don't do business with them because maybe they'll come to do they'll thank their Avodah Zarah. So that's what we're going to see different shatim. And what would be the concern that the Chum were not worried about? Amar Abaye, so Abaye says on the third line of Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, Mishum Basan Avela, right? The concern was they're not worried about Basan Avela. Law meaning you don't say Dilma Mahadara Pe Yisrael. Maybe the Jew will turn around for a second while he's cooking. He turned around to get something. And the guy would maybe put nevela into his pot, take a whole piece of meat and put it in his pot, right? And which is to be an Issa Daraisa. You're going to be eating nevela. The kavasa. And what do we mean? They were not worried. The kavasa, the similar thing to our case of Avodah Zarah. The Chum are not concerned that maybe you're going to sell a animal in the meat market. You're going to sell an animal to a guy, and maybe the money you're going to get is literally church money. It's money from the Avodah Zarah, which would be an Asher Daraisa. Rashi brings down the pasuk. You see the Rashi where it says there in parentheses, Varim Yud Gimel, you don't have any hana. You can't take church money and pleasure from it. So here we're talking about the Chum. We're not even worried about an Isser Daraisa, that maybe you're going to eat nevela. You're cooking together with the guy. Maybe you'll turn around. He'll put a piece of meat into your stew, and you're going to eat that meat directly, which is an Isser D'Oraisa. Chum are not worried. And here also, the Chum are not worried about Chum, that maybe if you're doing business in the meat market right outside the city, maybe one of the chomers, one of the priests or whatever is going to buy some meat with you from church money, which is million Isser D'Oraisa. So and certainly there's no concern about, the Isser of doing business with them 3 days before is really an Isser D'Rabbanan. The rabbi said, be careful, don't do business with them. They shouldn't come to thank their God. That's not an Isser D'Oraisa. It's not like you're worshiping an idol or taking money from the church. So that's, Abaye said they're not even worried about an Isser D'Oraisa. Certainly not an Isser D'Rabbanan. Rava says, no. There's certainly no Isser of the rice. You can't be concerned that he's going to put a piece of meat into your pot, because he's going to be afraid if you might catch him putting meat into your pot and you can't eat it anymore, you'll take him to court and demand payment for it. He wouldn't try that. So there's no concern about that at all. It just means that you're not worried about bishul. What does that mean? That maybe, the cook, the guy will help you, he'll put the fire, make sure that the fire is real strong. And what's bishul of kachavim? There's an isser. You can't have a goy, even if it's glad kosher food, a goy's not allowed to cook for you, right? You can't have a goy cook for you. It's called bishul akum. It's mutter if it's something that would be eaten raw anyway, and it's only for food that would be served to a royal party. Only special food. Not if you're talking about potato chips or something, some cheap cooking potatoes or something like that everybody eats. Right? We're talking about, so there's this sort of it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. You shouldn't come to mix with them, etc. So Bishul Kacham is a drabanan. There's no concern there at all. There's no way that the guy's going to put food literally into your pot. He's afraid of you. But what about the Bishul Kachavim? Maybe he's going to move the coals around and cook your food for you effectively because you're on the same stove. You're in the same the same stove. So maybe he's going to cook for you. No, they weren't worried about that. They weren't worried about that. Since they weren't worried. Why weren't they worried about that? Because, anyway, all that you have to do is stir the coals a little bit. Like, today, what do you do if you turn on the stove for the guy? If you turn it on, and then he cooks for you, they say that's okay. Not by the Sephardim, but the Ashkenazim. By Ashkenazim, if you start the oven, that's good enough. So they weren't worried about that. They weren't worried about that maybe you're going to do business with them on the day of their Avodah Zarah, because usually the people outside the city don't do that. Rashi says about halfway down the page, Rashi Mishum Yom Edom, in other words, you don't have to worry. Even on the day of their Avodah Zarah, you could do business with them. You don't have to worry that maybe the guy you're doing with business in the market outside the city is going to worship Avodah Zarah. You could do business with him even on that day. So Rabba said there's certainly no Isser Doraisa, but the Chacham weren't worried about an Isser Drabanan either over here, but Isser Drabanan. Rabba Barula in the Gemara says, Amar Lo Chashlam Chachamim Mishum Tzinur Tzinura. He says, you know what? On the Yom Edom, the Rav Chanina was not matter. The day of their holiday, yes, you have to be concerned. People right outside the city, because the marketplace of Azah was right outside the city, and you shouldn't do business with them actually on the day of the holiday, because maybe they'll think that God, maybe there are people from that city, or the people outside the city also worship Avodah Zarah. The concern was over here that that they weren't worried about something far off. What is that? Sinura. They weren't worried about if the Jew and the guy both cooked in the same stove. Are you worried about that splashing? Sinura is like splashing, or that it was ricocheting, that some food in the guy's pot might fall into your pot. Now, they weren't worried about that. Now, why weren't they worried about that? Rashi says, number one, because it's not shchiach. Usually, it's not going to splash in. And even if it did, it would be basal barov. If just a little splashing of the liquidy stew that the guy had, if a little bit splashed into yours, it's certainly batal barov. Probably even batal b'shishim, but it's certainly batal barov. So they weren't worried that. So they weren't worried about before Eid, meaning they were worried, according to Rabba Barula, they were worried more than according to Abai and Rava. Abai and Rava said they weren't worried about, they weren't worried about the holidays at all. Abai said they're not even worried that you're going to take church money from them, which would be an Isser D'Oraisa. Rava said Isser D'Oraisa is not an issue over here, but they weren't worried about they made them because the people outside the city didn't worship Avodah Zarah. You don't have to worry about them even on that day. Rabba Barula saying on the day of their Avodah Zarah, you have to worry about them. But to go that far and to add on to say Lifnei Day and 3 days before, you don't have to worry about that. That's what he means when he gave the example of, have you never seen the guy and the Jew cooking together in Tyre in the city of Tzur? They're worried about a far out thing. That's far fetched to say that something's going to splash into by the guy and the Jew cooking together. You don't have to worry about splashing. You don't have to go that far and worry about Lifnei Edom. Rashi says here in the wide lines, before he was the first of the wide lines in Rashi. You're not worried about maybe something splashing. You don't have to worry that it's splashed from his pot into your pot. It's a small isser. Number one, it's not likely. Even if it's right next to him, but Lifnei Dayan, the 3 days before, you don't have to be worried about. But according to Rabbi Barula, you would have to be worried on the day of the Avodah Zarah itself. You shouldn't do business with them even right outside the city, because the marketplace of the outside the city was right next to the city. All right, we'll pick them here from the 2 dots tomorrow. Mr. Shem, have a good day, everybody. Shavua Tov, B'surah Tovot.
It's interesting that the laws about tuna are very strict.
Right.
Okay? Now here you're allowed to cook the two.
That's right. Yeah. It was